The dust settled on the small Texas ranch as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the weathered fence posts. Maria stood at the edge of the property, her worn boots barely making an impression on the dry earth. At 28 years old, she carried the weight of a lifetime of disappointment in her shoulders, the kind that came from being told repeatedly that she was worthless, broken, and destined for a solitary existence. Her family's decision to sell her had seemed logical to them at the time, or so they claimed when they scattered afterward, unwilling to face the shame of what they'd done. Maria came from a small village in a region where such practices, though illegal, persisted in whispers and dark corners. Her inability to conceive after 5 years of marriage to a man who cared nothing for her had sealed her fate. When he divorced her, citing her infertility as grounds for abandonment, her family had deemed her a liability rather than a daughter. They had literally sold her to a labor broker for a pittance, hoping to recoup some loss and erase the embarrassment she represented. The transactions had been quiet and efficient. Maria had been transported to Texas under the guise of domestic work, her passport confiscated, her protests met with threats and indifference. For 18 months, she worked in a sprawling household, cleaning, cooking, and enduring conditions that stripped away her sense of self. She had nearly forgotten what it felt like to be valued, to be seen as anything other than a pair of hands and a body to exploit. Then came the day when she was reassigned to work at the Riverside Ranch, a sprawling cattle operation owned by a man named Sam Reeves. Sam was in his early 40s, a widower who had inherited the ranch from his parents and managed it with quiet competence. He had never married again after losing his wife to cancer 8 years prior, throwing himself instead into the work of maintaining the land and the livestock that had been in his family for 3 generations. When Maria arrived, Sam noticed immediately that something was wrong. She moved with the defeated shuffle of someone who had been broken, her eyes downcast, her voice barely above a whisper. He had hired her through an agency that promised domestic help, but the agency's representative seemed overly protective of her, insisting on weekly check-ins and strict rules about her communication with the outside world. Sam was a practical man, not prone to dramatic conclusions, but even his straightforward mind recognized the signs of something deeply amiss. He began asking questions, carefully, gently, approaching her the way he would approach a spooked horse. Maria was terrified at first, convinced that any disclosure would result in punishment or worse. But something in Sam's demeanor was different. He asked questions as if her answers genuinely mattered, as if she was a person whose experiences held weight and significance. Over several weeks, through conversations that began in the kitchen and extended to the barn, Maria slowly revealed her story. Sam listened without judgment, his weathered face growing darker as he understood the full scope of what had happened to her. Sam had connections, not because he moved in impressive circles, but because he was the kind of man who paid attention and maintained genuine relationships. He reached out to a lawyer friend who specialized in labor trafficking cases, and together they began the process of extracting Maria from her situation legally. The agency was shut down, the broker was investigated, and Maria was helped to file a report with federal authorities. It took months of careful coordination, but finally, Maria was free. Free, however, was a complicated concept for someone who had been told her entire life that she had no value. Sam offered her a legitimate job, fair wages, and a safe place to live on his ranch. Maria accepted, uncertain if this kindness was real or temporary, waiting for the moment when the other shoe would drop. But Sam's kindness was neither performative nor conditional. He treated her as he treated his ranch hands and household staff, with respect, fairness, and genuine concern for her well-being. It was in this context of safety and genuine care that something entirely unexpected occurred. As Maria began to heal, as she started to believe that perhaps she had some worth after all, she and Sam developed feelings for each other. It crept up on them slowly, neither of them quite acknowledging it at first. Sam brought her coffee in the morning the way he brought it to himself. Maria began to take care of his meals with particular attention, adding little touches that went beyond obligation. Their conversations, which had started as cautious revelations about her past, evolved into genuine discussions about books, dreams, and the possibility of different futures. 3 days after Maria had finally allowed herself to admit that she had fallen in love with Sam, and after Sam had nervously confessed that his feelings had long since moved beyond gratitude and rescue, they became intimate. What happened next seemed almost miraculous given the narrative that had been imposed upon Maria her entire life. Within weeks, Maria discovered that she was pregnant. The irony was almost too sharp to bear. The family that had sold her as infertile, the husband who had discarded her on the grounds of her inability to bear children, and the medical professionals who had examined her and shrugged with non-committal conclusions, all of them had been wrong. Or perhaps, Maria would later reflect, the issue had never truly been her body at all. Perhaps it had been the stress, the fear, the complete absence of safety and love that had prevented conception. Perhaps a body could refuse to bring new life into the world when it itself was not safe, not valued, not cared for. Sam's reaction to the news was uncomplicated and profound. He wept with joy, held her close, and immediately began making plans. He wanted to marry her, not out of obligation, but out of love and a genuine desire to build a life together. Maria said yes, and they married in a small ceremony on the ranch, surrounded by the few people who had become their chosen family. The pregnancy was straightforward and healthy. Maria received proper prenatal care for perhaps the first time in her life, and Sam accompanied her to every appointment, asking questions, taking notes, and treating the impending arrival with the same careful attention he gave to every important task in his life. When their daughter was born, a healthy, beautiful girl they named Hope, Sam held her with tears streaming down his face, and Maria felt something shift in her understanding of the world. She had been told she was infertile, unmarketable, a burden. She had been sold, exploited, and dehumanized. And yet, in the space of less than a year, her entire reality had transformed. She had been loved, truly loved, not for what she could provide or produce, but for the simple fact of her existence. That love, it seemed, had healed something in her that medical science had never been able to touch. Years later, Maria would work with organizations dedicated to helping trafficking survivors, sharing her story to give hope to others. She would eventually become a counselor herself, using her experience to help other women understand that their perceived brokenness might not be what it seemed, that trauma could masquerade as personal failure, and that genuine love and safety could be transformative in ways that transcended simple biology. Sam and Maria would go on to have 2 more children together, all born healthy and surrounded by the kind of love that neither of them had been certain existed. The Riverside Ranch became not just a cattle operation but a place of refuge, where Maria employed other survivors of trafficking, where second chances were given freely, and where the broken were helped to understand that they had never truly been the problem at all. Her family never reached out. The man who had divorced her never acknowledged his error. The authorities involved in her case moved on to other matters. But none of that mattered to Maria anymore. She had found something far more valuable than vindication or apologies. She had found home, belonging, and a love so genuine and transformative that it had literally created new life. And in that, she had discovered that her true worth had never been in question at all. It had only been waiting for someone to see it.